push to reach a solution to the 5-year conflict in Syria will go live to Geneva for the latest on the peace talks. Plus, more cases of the mosquito-borne Zika virus. We'll hear from the World Health Organization about how they plan to stop it. And it's crunch time in Iowa, just 2 days until the first caucuses of the US election. We'll go live to the political battleground. Hello, I'm Lynda Kinked. Welcome to CNN Newsroom. Thanks for joining us. We begin with the crisis in Syria and the search in Geneva for a political solution. The opposition's High Negotiations Committee has just arrived there. They finally agreed to attend today, but with the warning that there will be no talks until the government meets certain demands. Now, talks actually began on Friday with the government's delegation meeting with the UN's special envoy. Let's get the latest now on the developments in Geneva. Our Nic Robertson joins us there now. Nic, there have been 2 previous attempts to find a peace deal solution. What's the difference with this one?
Well, one of them is that Russia, who's one of the sort of principal sponsors behind President Bashar al-Assad, along with Iran, Russia has been brought into the diplomatic, the political process, the UN resolution that calls for these peace talks, calls for a new constitution, calls for elections in 18 months. Russia signed up to that, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, different to 2 years ago, of course, when they were really sort of backing President Bashar al-Assad. There was an expectation that as the government got into talks here, the Syrian government got into talks, that if they didn't negotiate in good faith, then the Russians would put pressure on them. Well, that didn't happen. So this go round, you have that as being something slightly different. Russia, in effect, committed by the UN Security Council resolution. The other thing that we hear about from diplomats around these talks is that the opposition is much more unified this time. The High Negotiating Committee is made up of a multitude of different groups from within Syria, opposition groups, running from sort of politicians, dissidents, writers, a former prime minister, all the way through to some of the hardline Islamist groups, not, of course, ISIS or the al-Qaeda group, al-Nusra inside Syria. They're excluded from the talks. But it's a full range of people, and under the leadership they have, former Prime Minister Riyad Hajib, we are told that they are very unified, that they are keeping, they discuss everything, come to a common agreement on everything. And that's different to last time, because last time you had a sort of an unwieldy group of rebel groups, then it wasn't clear who was leading who and who represented who, and there was a lot of disunity amongst them. Although at that time, of course, the UN blamed the government for not negotiating in good faith. So those are the principal differences, but obviously the conditions on the ground remain the same. And the terrible thing about all of this, of course, is that thousands, tens of thousands more people in the past 2 years have now died because the 2 groups couldn't get beyond their deadlock 2 years ago at talks here, Lynda.
That is a good point, and many more people at risk of starving to death as these talks go on. Now, we know a number of proxy talks will be underway in the coming days. Will there be a time in the near future when all sides will come to the same table to talk directly?
Sure. I mean, that's what Staffan de Mistura wants to happen. That's the idea of your proxy talks. Groups are in different rooms. They don't meet each other. The UN special representative, Staffan de Mistura, shuttles between them. The High Negotiating Committee arrived in here to Geneva late today. They've already said, we're not going to negotiate. We're not going into the UN. We're not here to negotiate. But they are expecting to meet de Mistura at their hotel. It's a different kind of concept, I guess, of the proxy talks here. That meeting is not expected to take place today, we understand. But absolutely, the hope is that common ground on particular issues can be found, that this will advance politically inside the rooms here, that militarily on the ground, that ceasefires can be found, that confidence can be built, and that way the 2 sides can come together. But, right now, we're such a long way away from that. I mean, you have the High Negotiating Committee here in Geneva, but saying we're not getting into negotiations proper. Right now, the real hope is that they can be, if you like, winkled out of their hotel and convinced to get inside the UN behind me here to actually get into the proximity talks proper. It's one baby step at a time, if you will, Lynda.
Yeah, some major challenges there. Nic Robertson in Geneva, thank you very much for your analysis. Well, underscoring the dire need for a solution in Syria, Doctors Without Borders now says 16 people have starved to death in the besieged town of Madaya. That's only 40 kilometres northwest of the capital Damascus, and that's since food and medical aid arrived earlier this month. Syria's 5-year civil war has already killed 250,000 people and forced millions of others to flee the country. Aid workers say people will continue to starve in Madaya and other Syrian towns like it unless shipments of food and medical aid are allowed in on a regular basis. Our Nick Walsh brings us a closer look at the suffering in Madaya.
Ice has now gripped the town of Madaya, adding to the siege and starvation gnawing away at what's left of life here. Aid came briefly along with global attention, but now it's gone. And the weak here are still said to be dying. This is Dr. Mohammed. He shows us Fawaz Saif Aldin, age 50. So malnourished, he can't cope with food, only drip feeds. Held here, almost a ghost, edging towards death. Like his granddaughter, Lamar, just 9 months old. She seems dazed. For more than 7 months, we've not had electricity, explains the doctor. We've nearly run out of wood. Now plastic is often burned. The weakest, immobile, activist Abdullah shows us.
This child here is very ill. He eat leaves, 3 leaves, and he get sick and ill in his stomach. His stomach is really, really hurt him. He needs immediately go to the hospital outside in Madaya.
But the little food here probably won't save the acutely malnourished who need urgent medical help, but it is handed out slowly.
Actually, if they didn't bring food for people, the people here will die because of starvation.
Here, in a makeshift hospital, struggling to keep the lights on, is where they come, hoping to find help. In the past 10 days since the arrival of relief supplies, the doctor says there have been 10 deaths. Scores of people have arrived at the clinic unconscious. We have around 500 sick people in the town that need hospital treatment. Syrian rebels have said they won't talk peace until sieges like these by the government are lifted. But rebels too are besieging other towns in the north. Hunger, a weapon of war, leaving 400,000 Syrians without the food they need, neither truly alive nor dead. Nic Walsh, CNN, Beirut.